Right. Thank you. Thank you. Folks, this is my fourth time speaking at A&E. The first one was 10 years ago, and I came in twice more. One was quite close to when COVID hit. So, uh, it's quite interesting to actually be doing this online for you. So, welcome one and all. And I'm great to see some familiar names and faces. Uh, think back to the companies you've worked at, and specifically to the time that you joined each one. Each company was different, right? But it had methods for getting work done, and those methods were presumably appropriate for the job. And still, every now and then, management tried to improve them, right? So there were new procedures and new tools and new templates for things, and maybe they restructured teams. And I invite you to consider how successful were those improvements. Now, in some cases, they went bigger, adopting Scrum or SAFe, Kanban, OKRs, DevOps, continuous delivery, other big things. How successful were those improvements and how sustainable? All of the change you've seen in your career was put in place with good intentions. Unfortunately, it wasn't always successful and it wasn't always easy. It's my observation that in terms of results and of people's experience, your experience, our industry is still not great at product development or solution delivery. And so we'll start today by understanding why that is, and then we'll answer this question. How can we improve product development effectively and sustainably? First, let's see what might happen when you try to change things, okay? So here are a few common examples. Get ready to type in the chat. If your company or client, if you're like an external coach, has tried at least one of these for improving value delivery, type the letter T in the chat, T for tried. All right, so the T's are flying in, not surprising. Now, still be ready to type in the chat. If these changes that they tried were great, sustainable, no side effect, type the letter G. G for great. And I'm not saying any G's coming in. Usually there's one, maybe two, sometimes G. Thank you, Carla. See, the thing is this. We make some changes, sometimes they're successful, but not all. If an attempted improvement is not a perfect success, what does happen? Okay? There are three things that commonly happen. One is unintended outcomes, what you might call side effect, but they're really unintended outcomes. For instance, you want to get really good at precise estimation and planning. I'm sure you've all heard that one before. But when you do that, you reduce adaptability. And you also reduce your efficiency because more of your time goes to the thinking about rather than the doing of. Another thing that can happen is that you just increase your risk. A lot of companies experience that doing continuous delivery without knowing for a fact that the code is safe. And the third thing that happens a lot is that those changes just don't catch on. For example, experimentation, big idea in the product world, right? But it often dies. It dies because people realize after a few months that they're really accountable for delivering on backlogs, right? And if something was on the list, they need to do what's on the list rather than prove that something should not be on the list or that it should change from what it's like on the list. And so that idea just dies. The reason for these effects, problems really, is that various parts of technological value delivery, the stuff all of us do, are interconnected in a system. And in a system, improving parts is not ideal. It's not enough, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. It's like if I took my regular Toyota and replaced the engine with a Tesla one. That's not going to work at all. The car wouldn't even move, assuming I could even rig anything in place. So, okay, what we need to do instead is to improve the system. Okay, I'm sure you've heard that before. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, here are some common popular ideas from the last few years. Each one is well intended, is not a bad idea, but it has limitations and sometimes side effects. So let's say you take Scrum. Not a bad idea, but Scrum is intentionally small. It doesn't say a whole lot. So then what? Or you go to the other end of the spectrum and say, no, no, we're going to do safe. The safe tells us how it's going to be, but maybe how it's going to be is not the best fit for your particular context. Or you copy paste from someone, the most famous example being Spotify. The problem with that is that you do not have the copied from business context, right? And you can't copy culture, which is really what makes the methods work. So that's not going to fly too well either. Okay, let's do value stream mapping and eliminate waste. Like a key idea in lean thinking, not a bad idea. However, if your product isn't solving customer problems, then waste is not your biggest issue. Maybe you say, okay, forget process. Okay, we'll just empower people, we'll invert the pyramid, we'll do servant leadership. Okay, fine, but your people still need a direction. They still need a direction for the product and for the way of working. So how would they decide on that? So today I want to show you a different new model, something I developed a couple of years ago. And it's now out in this book. And at the end of today, right, if you got the PDF and you also enter the draw, there'll be a draw for one digital copy. 20 years ago, I started helping organizations improve how they work. I've worked with over 100 so far, both tech and IT. And the model is really based on what I've learned from working with clients and my studies and my observations. Carla, how you entered the draw, the link, I put the link in the chat just before I started. If you scroll back, you'll see it there. The focus of improvement in this model is the fitness for purpose of the company's value delivery system. Now, those are really big words, so let's unpack them. There's this area of your company, a part of your company. It's people and process. So it's both contributors and management and how they work. They conceive, make, and deliver something that matters, a product, a solution. It matters to the company's customers directly, indirectly. That is what I refer to as the value delivery system. Again, that's a mouthful, and you might be wondering, why don't we have a better name? And the unfortunate thing is that as an industry, we don't have a better name for this. I mean, think about it. In a company, you'll have sales and marketing and HR and finance, right? One word, you know who they are, the boundaries are clear, you know what they do, they know what they do. But instead, when it comes to this thing that's on the slide here, organizations almost exclusively think about it in parts. There's product, design, engineering, testing, delivery, content. So what do they even call this thing? Now, in some tech companies, they might call it product development. That name is also not great because some people just think it means the coding and testing bit. Or if you're doing some internal development, you might call it IT. Okay, but then your business partners and your vendor staff, they're also part of the system, but they're not technically in your IT, so it kind of gets complex. Kanban has this really generic name for it. It calls it a service, okay? And then we also have the term value stream. My concern with the term value stream is that it connotes that work always flows downstream, which is actually not true. Because, and that's really a hallmark of working in a system, decisions and actions made in one part, like in development or in product or content, they can have ramifications everywhere else. Okay, so it's really more organized like a network rather than a stream. Now, before we continue, I want you to get a mental picture of the system that you work in, that you lead, or maybe, again, if you're external, the system that your client has. And I want to show you an easy way to think about it. Think about watching a movie and actually staying to the end. What comes on at the end is the credit roll, right? So the credit roll shows everybody who contributed, including decision makers, like producers, right? Everybody who contributed to making the thing, thinking about the thing, delivering the thing. So if your product or solution were a movie, what would your credit roll include? Okay, so just get a mental picture because you kind of know, right? But just make a mental construct. The interesting thing about it is that it's never, well, never, like almost never, a clean slice of the org structure. And there's generally people reporting to multiple managers. Okay. The other thing I mentioned here is that what we're actually focusing on if we want to improve things is fitness for purpose. Okay, so what is that? Fitness for purpose is actually not a common term at all. It's something that we usually, if we even use it, we use it in the context of products. For instance, here is my phone. Does the phone do what I need it to do, like jobs to be done and all of that? And here I am applying this concept to our way of getting stuff done when it comes to delivering technological products, technological value. That is really the purpose of the value delivery system, and the fitness of it is really how well it does that, how well it helps the company achieve its mission and objectives. Now, here's something interesting. All systems are different, but I've discovered through a lot of research that fitness progresses, like in the real world, not in theory, not in some model of how things ought to be, but in the real world, it tends to proceed through 5 levels. And systems that do in fact get better go through them one at a time. It's the same levels, whether you are tech or IT, product or project, Kanban, hybrid, Scrum, safe, whatnot. And another thing about this is that at each level, a certain risk can kind of knock down the system to a lower level. Let me show you what they are. When a system has fitness level 1, it's not doing well at all. It has some successes, but it's really unable to contribute appropriately, adequately to achieving company objectives. And so what happens there is that people work really hard, but they feel like they can never succeed. And so the big risk there is that the few people who hold the place together are just going to give up and go someplace nicer. A system that's at level 2, much better. It contributes to achieving objectives, but it's neither effective nor efficient enough. This is actually a very common situation in early stage or just plain out rigid agile implementations. So things are kind of okay, but really not quite. And what happens there is that because things are kind of okay, but not quite, there are excessive disruptions with stakeholders and senior people who want their thing. And while the system tries to accommodate them, there's so many disruptions. So the big risk is that things kind of break down, like abandoning Agile and things like that. Level 3, results are satisfactory. But when you pop the hood open, you realize that everything that happens there is really because of a few decision makers. Now, when I say decision makers, what I mean is not necessarily like the VP or C-level, but there are a few people, they're not a team, and they kind of make all the high impact decisions. They might be like a lead architect, maybe a really senior product manager, they might be a staff engineer, they might be a director of something or other. So a few people that kind of hold the place together. And what's happened is that they've kind of optimized the system to a certain thing. So you would have seen this in agile implementations that are kind of clockwork. Like the sprints are kind of always the same, and like we know how things go here. But then when there are big changes, there's a lot of chaos and breakdown because the system doesn't know how to deal with that. Level 4, it's effective, it's efficient. Level 4 systems, they don't have any problem hiring, right? People want to work there. It is lovely. People feel good about things up until they have to take on some really major thing, like maybe a key platform is getting old and needs to be replaced. Or maybe tech debt is kind of biting them like really hard. And now there are some things they can no longer do. So some things really have to be replaced. Maybe they've acquired a company and need to integrate it. Big things. And so it's just slower to achieve that. And what happens there is like a lot of the senior people and the stakeholders kind of lose their patience and their trust. And it's like, you guys should be getting this by now. And so there's a lot of breakdown of good habits. Level 5 system might sound like Nirvana. They do exist. not common, obviously, but a level 5 system produces all the results the company needs from it. However, still at risk. And the risk is that somebody's really senior, usually at the top, like even the top of the company, new person comes in and says, we're not going to do things like this anymore, because they have their own worldview of how development should run or product should run, and they just change things over, and a bunch of people leave. I don't know. I've seen this enough. So back to the leaders. Okay, we want to deliver better results. Okay, like I said before, we need to improve the system, but I also showed you, well, you can't just improve one part. Like, you can't just make development great without having knock-on effects when something's not quite, sticking. And you can't even focus on just improving one aspect, like efficiency or timeliness, without having a lot of collateral damage. Again, because of system. So what we want to make is we want to make his holistic changes, and really the target of our efforts is the way of working. I think this is something I even spoke about at Agile New England when I did my 2019 talk, where I defined way of working as the combination of mindset and tactics. I'm going to talk about this a bit more later, but really it's the how we make choices, values, beliefs, principles, that govern everything that we do and how we implement them in process and structure. Okay. So if you look at this slide, I mean, yeah, make holistic changes to the way of working. This sounds like a lot of work. Sounds like a lot of work. There's never a good time. There's never budget, right? But at the same time, a company that's not doing anything about its system and it's not level 5, it's bleeding money, right? It's bleeding money through not quite doing things right and being too slow to do things, and people not quite, getting it, and all of that, all of those indicators of, fitness that is not ideal. So I did some more research into what companies did, not just my clients, but what companies did, what worked, what didn't. And I discovered that, and actually to my surprise, to be honest, I discovered that moving a system effectively and sustainably from troubled to awesome takes only 10 strategies. And the best thing that makes this whole model even viable, instead of just calling it transformation, is that you don't need to do them all at once. They are sequential. For example, if your system is at level 2, I'm going to show you 2 strategies that you need to employ at that level. You do not need to worry about anything from 3 and 4. So they're sequential. They're also incremental. So the idea is that you execute these strategies to a point where their adjustments are sustained and their effects are real. Okay, so you kind of layer your changes. And this is how you can break down big, scary transformation, which is actually the cardinal sin of the Agile community, where we do everything, everywhere, all at once, because we know all of this goodness and we want to give people all the Agile goodness, but we pile everything on. Instead, we layer things. In the book, I tell the story of a company, a product company that's part in France, part in Canada, so it was all online. 50 people, almost all of them in product development. When I first met them, they were at level 1. Like, product development was not doing well at all. And within 10 months, they got to level 4. And it's not to say that I was great. It's because we primarily did things in the sequence that I'm going to show you, instead of, again, piling everything on and just doing continuous improvement, which is generally too low level to matter. So these strategies I'm going to show you are applied throughout the system. So they really require a partnership of change leaders. Otherwise, you're back to making localized improvement. Like, we'll do testing here and we'll do experiments there, right? You saw that it may not help. So you need leaders that work together, and they're actually intentional and explicit about creating a suitable culture, which is really the extension of mindset. So like I said, everything I'm going to show you today, and there's going to be Q&A at the end, comes from this new book. Anybody who decides to buy a copy today, a physical copy, just let me know, and I'll send you the digital so you can have it on your phone and laptop as well. Okay, so let's see how we do this. In order to invoke a strategy, we need to first know which level we're on, okay? So I also looked into how can we even assess our level of fitness right now? When I looked at what's in the market, I saw lots of big surveys, big expensive consulting. I mean, I've done assessments too, and people pay me for them, but it's money, right? And I was looking for something that busy leaders, including C-levels, can spend up to 10 minutes on and get an answer. So I'm going to show you how that works. And in order to do this, I also had to kind of unpack the concept of fitness. And even there, we don't have a ton of models in the industry to how we think about fitness. I mean, Kanban has a few things to say, but they're actually just one perspective on things. So I wanted something holistic. It can't be how well you do Scrum, because what if you don't do Scrum? It can't also be how well you do Kanban, because what if you don't do Kanban? Because realistically, most companies just do their own thing, and it could be a mashup of things. Um, and it can't even be specific to the culture, because you can have great fitness for purpose in a terrible culture, and vice versa. So really, fitness has to do with the effects of the operating model. And so we know we have the right effects if raising them corresponds to having higher fitness. So in my research, I found these 6 aspects that correlate to fitness, like when put together. So I'm going to explain them now, while also demonstrating how to assess fitness using an example from a former client, not the one I mentioned before. Um, Again, if you get that PDF, again, the link was in the chat, 3pvantage.com/ANE, where you also enter the book draw. That gives you a PDF. It's a written guide for this entire talk. It includes the assessment. So if what I'm doing here feels a little bit fast for you, you would like to follow along and kind of assess your own system at the same time, but maybe it's a bit too fast for you, you'll have this in the PDF written down so you can do it at your own pace when you're back at work. And today you can mostly see like how it's done. So just a few details about the company we're talking about. This was a rapidly growing startup. That was before the tech world got super nervous. They had raised a pile of money, like lots of money, okay? Very much a leader in the space. The space needed the disrupting, and they were doing just that. They had a single product, which was both facing kind of business situations and users, and everything was managed as one system. They had about 40, 50 people. They all worked in 5 Scrum teams, kind of balanced teams, and really working on different areas of the product. So they were largely independent. So first fitness aspect is throughput. I'm sure you've all heard this one before. Here's how I define it without using metrics. It's the amount of usable working product that the system delivers in short spans of time. I'm not saying how short is short. You define it for your own system. Usable, not useful. We're going to get to useful later. And somehow amount. The reason you'll see this assessment does not use metrics at all is because nobody has complete metrics, garbage in, garbage out, and they're always subject to interpretation. So how would you rate a system on throughput? Again, so I'm going to show you how I do this with this client example. If you want to do this on your own at the same time as I'm going through the demonstration, go for it. Just make sure you write stuff down, because it's going to be difficult to keep this in memory. So the first question I ask is, and there's going to be the same 3 questions for each fitness aspect. The first question is, what's the best we could do? What's the optimum throughput for us? We don't need to be Google. We don't need to be Facebook. We don't need to be Netflix. What is the optimum for us? So it needs to be relevant, and it needs to be practical, right? So given our technology stack and the skills we have on the team, and also what would matter to our clients. what would matter? I mean, throughput helps us learn. Would we be learning fast, even if things were ideal? So you think about the optimum. The second question is, okay, how are things right now? Okay, what's the current throughput? Now, throughput is not something you measure like this moment, like you take a temperature. Instead, it's like kind of on average over a few months, assuming they're kind of normal months, not like the company just got bought, and across the teams. Okay. And I find that a lot of people that do this assessment, and it's been a couple of hundred so far, they kind of know. They don't actually need the metrics. They kind of know what the throughput is like. Now, the third question is, how does the current state relate to the optimum? So in this company, that again, that former client, when I assessed them, right, it was like a 3-day assessment, I saw that the teams regularly made good progress, but the company just needed more because it had raised a pile of money and it had like pretty high growth targets. It needed more. So let me show you how you would rate. You started by asking the current state, is it far enough from the optimum that it's a problem? It keeps coming up in management meetings. People are not happy. It's an issue. Or it should be an issue, but nobody's talking about it. But really, it is. In this case, you say, well, that's a far. Okay, so the current is far from the optimum. Let's say you say, no, it's not far. It's not like that. It's better. So then you flip to the other end of the spectrum and you say, well, are the current state and the optimum actually close enough, right? Are things good enough? You'll never hit the optimum, and that's okay. But are things just good enough? It's not an issue. In which case we say near. If you say, well, it's not that either, and then it's midway. So these are not thirds. This is totally qualitative. Is it far? Is it near? Otherwise, it's midway. So if we go back to this example, teams made good progress, but the company needed more. Would you like to put in the chat how you would rate this? Is it far, near, or midway? Yeah, so a bunch of people are saying midway. I'm not going to give you a ton of information because there's, not a whole lot of time today. And of course, there's confidentiality. But yes, I would have rated them midway as well because things were not broken, but they were definitely not quite there yet. Okay, so even though, yes, they needed more for their targets, and you might say, well, that's a far. Again, because things were not broken. It's not that they were behind because, their process was just no good. I mean, this could have easily been solved by hiring, really. Okay, the next fitness aspect is outcomes. So now we're asking about not just usability, we're asking about useful. Here's outcomes. Some of them are user outcomes. You know this from the Agile world, right? We solve their problems, we just need achieve goals and so on. There's also business outcomes, so outcomes that our organization gets as a result of our work, like seizing opportunities, right? Or reducing tech debt so that we can move faster later on and whatever. So again, we ask the same question. If we were like really good at this by our standards, what would that be like? So what would be the optimum, the practical and relevant optimum for us? And then the same second question as before. How are things right now? Again, on average, across all parts of the product. So maybe you have 5 teams and one team is like whiz bang. They do things like super well. And then you have 4 other teams whose approach to solving problem could really use a lot of help. Your users, your customers, they don't care which team does what. They care for the aggregate. So the question is about the aggregate, right? So what I found in this company, as far as outcomes went, is that they delivered on backlogs. The backlogs were prioritized, right? So the Scrum was right. It was stressful, I should say, but that's actually irrelevant for the assessment. But the value wasn't great. And the value wasn't great because the product strategy was poor. So how would you rate this? Is this far? Is this near? Is this midway? Yeah, I'm seeing a bunch of fars coming in. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the fact that, they kind of did the Scrum well, the Scrum, is actually immaterial, because if what they delivered was not great value, then it doesn't matter how compliant they were. Okay. Third aspect is timeliness, which is really in the eye of the beholder, which in this case is users and customers. So the system's delivery of outcome-producing results. What we're looking at is by the time the users, customers, they get the deliverables, are they still valuable? Okay. So you may use deadlines, you may not. It doesn't actually matter. What matters is what the value that your users get from the thing by the time they get it. So again, what is the optimum? What is the current performance on timeliness? And how is one relative to the other? Here's what I found at the client. By the time they actually finished customer meaningful features, it was too late. Okay, it just took them a lot of time. And that, by the way, had nothing to do with the growth targets, which was really the throughput question. This was simply just how long it took to do things in terms of getting them to the clients. So how would you rate this? Okay, a bunch of stars. Yeah, I would agree. All right, fourth aspect is adaptability. Now, this one is a bit special because it's adaptability of two things, not just one. You want your system to be adaptable, meaning that you can adjust your way of working, like team structure or process or whatever. But you also want your product to be adaptable because it needs to change so that it keeps delivering value. So the question of adaptability is, adapting to important changes, whether you ask for them or not, and whether your adaptation was helpful or not. Okay. Question is simply how adaptable were you? So again, what is the optimum adaptability for the system and its product? I want to emphasize this. It's both of those things, because that's really what your users care about. They get something. They don't care how you went about it. What's the current state? How is one relative to the other? Far, near, or midway? Here's what I found. For them, changing product direction and adjusting process, they were not painful, but they weren't always easy either. How would you rate this? Yeah, so a bunch of you are saying midway. Yeah, I would agree. Now, by the way, if you had been there, if you had actually interviewed everybody, you might have come to a different conclusion, but it's still far near or midway, okay, based on what you found. This is what I found from talking to what was it, 30 people or so, something like that. Anyhow, now, I said 6 fitness aspects. We're on to number 5. They are not dimensions. They are not independent. That's by design. And in fact, the one we're looking at now, it goes meta. It goes meta to the previous 4. So what we're looking at is how consistent is the system about the effects that it achieves. So it achieves some throughput, it achieves some outcomes, and so on. How consistent is it about that? You might also be familiar with the concept of variation, which is really the flip side of this one, the inverse, right? So if things vary a lot week to week, month to month, then it's not very consistent, okay? If things vary little, then the system is very consistent. What we're asking about is the consistency. Again, same 3 questions: optimum, current state, and the relation. In this case, the teams really kept a good rhythm. They had good air cover from their directors. So I'm not even going to ask you, it's pretty obvious that this one was a near. So if you look at this, 2 of their fitness aspects were far and 2 were midway, not the best thing, right? But they were very consistent about this. And this, you'll see later, it's actually important, because if the system is highly inconsistent, improving it is super hard, right? That's basic Deming thinking. Okay, the last one goes meta once more, one more level. And now we're looking at cost efficiency. Because ultimately, it boils down to how much the company is paying for all this, how much it's paying its employees, vendors, contractors, cloud, process administration, Jira, you name it. Okay, including onboarding, training, for all the people in the system. So about this, again, we can ask, what is the optimum? The optimum, of course, is not 0, right? You can't achieve this with $0. But if you were like really cost efficient about it, what would that be like? So what's the optimum? What's the current state? Which again, you kind of look at, staffing and tech debt and a whole bunch of stuff that goes towards getting the work done. What I found is that the staffing level was good, again, for what they were doing, but the work itself wasn't very efficient, largely because of technical debt. So not so much process waste, but technical debt. So this one I would count as a midway. Okay, cost efficiency was definitely not far. It was not, they were not being wasteful, but it was not near either, again, because of the situation with everything just not being efficient enough due to tech debt. Okay, so here's what we do now. Very scary math coming up. Okay, we convert these words to numbers. By the way, there's a reason I do this instead of going with 1, 2, 3 in the first place, because we skew ourselves when we use numbers. So you convert each to like, a 1, 2, or 3 based on this list here. And then you sum them up, you end up with a number between 6 and 18, and this is how you map it to the fitness level. That's it. No metrics were harmed in the making of this movie. Again, that's by intent. I know for a fact that a bunch of VPs and directors have done this in my presence, but still, they've done this and it took them 10 minutes. Because the whole point of this is to know what level we're at so that we can know what strategies to employ. That's really it. So this is not the type of assessment where we say, oh, you're elite, or you're good, or walking, or running. It's not about that. We're not comparing to industry standards, which are partial and elusive. We just need to know where you're at. And based on that, you'll know what to do. So gaming this as it doesn't even make sense. Okay, for this company, if you do the conversion of these words to 3, 2, and 1, you get a raw fitness score of 11. That puts them at level 2. Just to remind you, level 2 basically means that it's neither effective nor efficient enough, which was very much the case for them. This is the link again. So if anybody still wants the written guide or to enter the book draw, you can use the link here. You can use the QR code, same thing. Maggie, if maybe you'd like to put the link in the chat, maybe it helps people. So let me continue and review the 10 strategies for you. But first, I want to share an important point. Whatever your system's current level is, for it to be real and sustainable, and for the strategies at that level to make a difference, you need to be sure that all the strategies from the lower levels are baked in. I mean, they don't have to be perfect. They're not going to be perfect, but just part of normal execution. So for example, if you assess your system comes out at level 2, like I told you before, you don't need to worry about 3 and 4 at this point, but pay attention to what I'm saying about level 1 and see if they're properly in place. Because if they're not, if they're kind of partial, you'll have to firm them up first. Okay? If you're at a higher level, like level 4, pay attention to what I say about levels 1, 2, and 3, and you'll need to plug holes in that sequence. Okay, going back to the incremental nature of the strategies. Okay, so what do you do when you're at level 1? You do 2 things. The first one actually happens outside of the teams. You need to make sure that your project portfolio is strategically managed. Now, your project portfolio it's a bit of a generic name. You might call it a roadmap, okay? This is like the container of all the big work. The epics, the initiatives, tech debt reductions, again, big features of any kind, all the major work. It's super important that that portfolio include or capture both user-facing work and also internally facing work, again, like tech debt reduction or replacing some plumbing or something like that. And it's also super important that it be managed cross-functionally. So you need like a cross-functional group of managers, like in product and engineering and design and maybe a couple of stakeholders, to kind of work together on doing this. So you need to have good strategic control over what's happening now, what's in progress, and also what's committed. Maybe you use, limiting WIP from Kanban. Maybe you use something else. It doesn't actually matter. The point is, unless you do this, your teams are going to have way too much work to do. Kanban calls this overburdening. It's a really good word. And you'll never actually get out of level one because they'll never be able to finish anything. There's going to be escalations all the time and reprioritization and all the trouble of level one. You'll just never escape it. The second thing to do, and I touched on this before, and I'll say a bit more now, is you want to make sure that your way of working is suitable for what you need to do. Think about it this way. What is vital for the system so it delivers the right product to the right customer at the right time? Is it to be innovative, or is it to be predictable? Is it to have flow, or is it to maximize people's work, what you might call resource efficiency or utilization? Is it to be collaborative or to specialize? These are all questions at the level of what I've referred to, and that was in one of my earlier A&E talks, as values. Every system has them de facto or explicitly, intentionally. You want intentionally and explicitly, and there's just a few of them. Agile has 4, you know them, they're in the manifesto. Real life companies might have something that's a little bit different, but the thing is that there's just these like 3, 4, 5 things that you optimize the way of working for. And you do this in the context of what the systems people believe about, like basically their axioms, what they take for granted about the work, the customers, the technology, engaging people. And out of that, you can design a way of working. And it might happen to look like Scrum. It might happen to look like Safe. It might happen to look like none of the above. And that's totally fine. But the important point, and this is what I've been doing with my clients for more than 10 years now, is to really follow the arrows in this diagram, as opposed to do what most of the industry does, which is to go the exact opposite way, which is let's take something like Scrum, just because it's popular. That's why I picked this as an example. We'll take something and bend reality to work with it. Instead, there's a process for intentionally and rationally designing your way of working. So it's described in the book. It's basically a collaborative workshop, sometimes spread out over several meetings. I can tell you that, for a typical system with a typical client, it's rarely more than a day and a half. And they sometimes spread out over smaller meetings. So once you do that, once you do both 1A and 1B, the teams have a chance of succeeding. And the teams are, kind of properly structured to do what they need to do. And they have a way of working that looks promising. It's relevant for what you're trying to do. Okay. So at level 2, you need to do 2 things. One of them is to realize that there are gaps in your decision making. Even if you take an off-the-rack framework, let's say Safe, there is going to be a bunch of product impacting decisions that need to be made, but it's not clear who makes them. And sometimes those decisions get reversed because the wrong person made them. I'll give you a classic example. You know who gets to decide on a release date? Who gets to move a date? Let's say we're midway through a big release and things are bad. Who gets to move the date? In a lot of companies, they don't have a good answer for this. And so they default to 2 things. One is cultural norms and the other one is the hierarchy. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it may not actually be what you want. So what you need to do is really kind of inventory any product affecting decision making and just make sure that it has a home. I'm not saying consensus. I'm not saying advice process or any of the fancy processes that people have. Choose what makes sense for you, given your context, given the mindset that you've kind of analyzed before when you did your way of working, but just make sure that they have a home. Now, the second strategy is to stabilize the system. Think about it this way. You have a whole bunch of people taking demand, which is requirements, projects, roadmap items, portfolio items, and at some point stuff comes out, deliverables. Can you get to a point where you can set realistic and acceptable expectations about, when stuff might come out and in what shape? Okay, so time and quality. Now, this is going to look different depending on your commitment cycles and your release length. Like if you work on big projects, it looks one way. If you do 2-week cycles, it looks different. If you're doing total flow, it looks different. But you need to create that stability. Systems that have just gone into level 2, or maybe got knocked down to level 2 because maybe they hired a whole lot of people very quickly, they're a little more erratic, and we need to fix that. How? Lots of good ideas in Kanban. Visualizing, WIP, policies, managing high variability delays, managing bottlenecks, and lots of good ideas in Agile, like structuring teams that are T-shaped or have enough T-shaped people, breaking work down by outcome, not by function, getting to done. So lots of good ideas there, which, by the way, also work for Waterfall, if that happens to be what you use. But the idea is that you need to kind of do this over a few months so that things kind of settle. Okay, doing these two will get you to level 3. So let's just summarize. What do we have at this point? The portfolio is under control, so teams are not underwater. They have a way of working that is generally appropriate. Decision-making has a home, and the system is stable. Now we need to do some more work on the human side of the system. And the first thing to do, so you don't do these 3 at the same time, you do the A first, is you need to help people feel more safe to actually improve teamwork, make it real, and to improve collaboration. So let me explain what I mean by these. The safety that we talk about in the Agile community is, there's a model by Timothy Clark that actually identifies 4 levels of safety, and I'm referring to what he calls contributor safety. This is the safety to engage where others are involved. And there's another part of it that doesn't usually get a lot of press, and that is the safety to do my work without fear of failure. So we need to create this type of safety. We could actually get out of levels 1 and 2 without it, which is really interesting. But now, if we want to get actually better than that, if we want to get more than just a stable system, we need people to feel a bit more safe, and that's of course where leaders come in, and through their behaviors, what they say, what they don't say, what they do and don't do. Teamwork. In so many companies, groups are called teams, but they're really groups. They're not teams. People don't have each other's back. They don't actually share the work. People have stuff on their plate. You just go to stand-ups and you'll see. Okay, that those are really work groups and not teams. And so now is the time to fix this. Something I suggested in my first book, The Human Side of Agile, is to have this role called the Agile Team Leader. It may be populated by a Scrum Master or a project manager, but the big idea is that it's somebody who has the responsibility to help the team thrive. Okay, to kind of go through, storming, norming, and all of that. And the third thing is to actually get some more collaboration in there. Again, something that is in the blind spot for a lot of organizations. They think people collaborate. They use the word all the time, but people really just cooperate. Again, everybody has their own thing, and they're just kind of friendly and helpful and professional, but they don't actually own results together. And that's such a missed opportunity. So you don't need to go 100% collaboration. Sometimes in the Agile community, we kind of give this impression away, but it's irrelevant. You need a balance. In every system, you need a balance between collaboration, cooperation, and working alone. But what I know is that systems that just got into level 3, their balance is off. Second thing to do. Your system looks ahead to several horizons. One of them is the portfolio or the roadmap. So that's usually like a year, 18 months, 24. There's releases and projects that might be a few months. There's sprints, there's the daily horizon. Think about the commitments being made for each horizon. So there can be commitments to objectives. We're going to achieve this objective, this OKR, this whatever. You can have commitments to achieving certain customer outcomes, business outcomes. But you can also have commitments to the solution is going to look like this. And we're going to achieve it just so. And we're going to execute just so. So commitments in terms of what exactly will be included. Maybe like, people produce an entire design and that's what the developers need to build. Or there's like, here's the process you guys are following and that's it. There's no variation there. And the thing is that can limit fitness. So really, the strategy here is to commit to less and to plan for less, especially in the longer horizons. So anybody here who has helped companies get better with Agile, you would have done this, right? You would have done this if let's say they're on a yearly cycle or big projects and you take them to 3 months. Or maybe they're doing 3 months and you help them go to like every 6 weeks or 2 weeks. Again, whatever makes sense in context. This is hugely beneficial to the customers, of course, but also to the organization, right? Risk reduction and early value and everything's more resilient and so on. The other thing I'm saying here is to increase release frequency. So, but the point I want to make about this is that that's actually secondary to the commitments. The commitments made in the system, they touch everywhere in the company. They touch finance, they touch customer service, they touch marketing. And so making that happen is the more important thing. Once you're able to work with your counterparts on, we'll do important work, but we're not tying ourselves down to exactly what's going to be. Now you can work on increasing release frequency. Because increasing release frequency is kind of easy, but if you're still committing to a ton, it's not going to make that much of a difference. And the third strategy actually is really closely related to this. Think of all the planning activities in your system, like product discovery, solution design, release planning, migration planning. You have teams participating in that. At level 3, probably not effectively and meaningfully and efficiently enough. I see this all the time. Teams sit through release planning, sprint planning, whatever. Every now and then they'll still estimate something or break it down a couple of tasks. But otherwise, they don't really contribute tons. So we want to change that. Okay, we want to change that. By and large, it's about getting better meetings. That's usually what it is. And having done the first 2 strategies will definitely help you. So look at what we've done here so far. We've unburdened the teams. We've designed a way of working to be appropriate. Decision-making is sorted out. The system is stable. People feel safer. Teamwork is better. Collaboration is better. Commitments are not to the far future. Release frequency is better, and teams contribute more. That gets us to level 4. And at level 4, we can do even better. Now, a lot of companies will just stop at level 3. And you know what? Fine. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Because level 4 is where leaders start getting nervous. Because the first thing to do is to expand team ownership. So there's definitely some distribution of control. Because really, I've seen this many times, a system will get to level 4, but really, what do teams influence or control? They do little process things, maybe what's on their definition of done, or little things they do in changing the retrospectives, but they can't, for instance, decide to form a temporary sub-team or to form a guild or to take ownership of like a platform upgrade. Somebody else does it for them. So the strategy here is to kind of break out of that situation and give teams greater ownership. Definitely requires different engagement from leaders. Second thing to do is to really get better at decision making. So decision making has a home and teams contribute and all of that, but think about it. Every decision made, how things actually turn out, like actual outcomes, is not necessarily the same as their intended outcomes. The intended outcome are always good. And the gaps exist everywhere, like in product and prioritization and the process. So you can't eliminate it, but you definitely can improve things. So you want to improve inputs to decisions. That's when we collect a lot of data, like on our customers, how even usage data. We start with why, we get feedback, right? It's this big agile idea of feedback. Yeah, absolutely. But we also improve how we make decisions. And one thing that is super helpful at this point is to really bring more system thinking into decisions and not just think about, the cut and dried work, but also think how would doing this affect us? And really doing the system thinking of if we do this, this happens, and then that happens, and maybe things will then break down. And the last thing is really to kind of get the technical cost of change under control. So what I mean by that is whenever change comes in, change to the product, there's all sorts of costs. And we've eliminated many of them by doing the previous strategies, but one thing we haven't eliminated is how much it's going to cost us to change the code. So there's really two things to do now. One is to look at our existing code base and look at where are the likeliest changes that are the most expensive and deal with that. If that sounds like paying down tech debt, that's mostly right. But there's another thing, which is when we're developing new things, we want to develop them in a way that makes their likeliest changes affordable. And that's where a lot of the agile technical practices come in. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have dealt with tech debt before, and maybe you're wondering, why are we getting to it so late? Why is it only at level 4? What I've found is that even though people honestly do try to deal with it at the lower levels, they don't succeed. It just doesn't work because, like at level 2, they're generally trying to make ends meet, and at level 3, there's just this perception that things are okay, right? Things are humming along. Why should we even deal with this? But at level 4, there's finally this. The system is more calm, so it can turn more of its attention to not just making ends meet, but to also making the future better. Okay, now you've probably realized that all of this can't exist in a vacuum. You need a minimum foundation of leadership for the strategies to be effective. And this is it. We need our leaders to make decisions with the system in mind. We need them to understand ways of working. It's not just process and practices and tools, right? But it's really the choices people make, and those are invisible. Again, mindset. We want leaders to be intentional and explicit about those changes, about those elements of ways of working, and just to know how to work effectively with human beings, because that's where the change starts. So like something I tell change agents all the time, and it's one of the first recommendations in the chapter in the book about this, is presume there's fear. People are afraid. They're afraid for their self-worth and relationships with work and feeling of meaning and a whole bunch of stuff. We can't just dump changes on them and just expect everything to stick. And of course, before executing each strategy, you kind of need a good coalition to lead the change, right? It can't be just an individual director or a VP or a program manager or a coach. You need a broad coalition because the strategies all cross the system. That's the big deal. That's one reason the fall is so unique. And of course, everybody needs to be ready, willing, and able. That's basic change management. So let's summarize. So you have a lot of people. The system I keep talking about, it's bigger than a team. It's not a whole company, but it's still bigger than a team. Or if you have, several teams at like a less or some of the scaled Scrum approaches, there's still more people than that. what I've shared with you is unique in that it's gradual. It's not big bang scary transformation that doesn't work. At the same time, it is holistic. It's not just a team, but it's also targeted. Instead of just saying, well, do your continuous improvement, do your DORA metrics, do this, do that, it's like specific strategic changes that are basically ordered in dependency sequence, and they make the change more sustainable. Without prescribing your target state, for some companies, this will end up looking like flow, and for others, it will remain a project model. And that's totally fine if that's what they need. So, quick summary. You need to work with the whole system. The target of your improvements is really the way of working, again, mindset and tactics. You start by assessing the current level. You can use the PDF. It comes out telling you your fitness level is X. You look at the levels lower than X and say, well, those strategies there, do we have them baked in? If not, you fix them in that sequence. And then you execute the 2 or 3 for your level. And that will definitely shorten the time to greatness or whatever improvement you need. So I'm happy to take questions, but very quickly, I'll also do the book draw. We want to start with questions?
Yeah, let's do some questions if folks have them. Gil covered some good amount of material here. So, and as you mentioned, there's a lot more in the book and in the PDF. But folks have questions, you can type them in the chat or take yourself off mute and let it fly.
Hey Gil, it's Carla. I've just come off mute. So this all sounds amazing and like is really resonating for me. When you're implementing these strategies, is there a rough timeline that you see to step between stages? Like, is 1 to 2 faster? Does it depend on the company? Is it roughly 6 months each stage?
It varies so much by how many people you're talking about.
Sure.
How stressed out everybody is.
Imagine a situation where everyone is very stressed out and tremendously sick of change.
Yeah. So look, I know of cases where it takes 2 or 3 years. Again, the example from the book, that was 10 months. But I can tell you there, people were hungry for change because they'd brought Scrum in, but everybody was suffering. And they wanted change, and management was all in. All in. I have been coaching, consulting, training for 20 years now. I can't remember a client that was so like, Gil, just tell us what to do and we'll do it. And they actually did it, including the founder who nobody believed would actually change his ways. Of course, that's not the situation in many other places. So it may be longer, but the point is you don't have to go through all 5 levels, kind of, boom, boom, boom. But you can just, let's say you're at 2, get to 3, let that settle, sustain it.
Yeah.
There may be other things going on, and of course it's been a few months, so maybe the board has some ideas, or the market has changed. Who knows? Yeah.
No, that's useful. Thank you.
I want to do the draw now very quickly, so that if anybody needs to go. Now, here's how I draw. Okay, I need my reading glasses, so I can't possibly see who this is until I go like this. John. Okay, the URL is a agig something. Do we have someone? John?
John. Speak now.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so this Yahoo address is yours?
Yeah, Gaganon. It means hope to hear from you soon.
Oh, okay.
If you look it up in the dictionary.
Okay, so you will hear from me soon when I send you
Cool.
the ebook. Yeah.
Hey, thanks.
Congratulations, John. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, my address?
And just to remind folks, again, anybody who wants the physical book, just let me know today that you're getting it, and I'll send you the digital as well. People seem to like to have it like on their phone and laptop and whatnot. Okay, so it's on my sticky note now. Bill, your hand is up.
No, no, I was just clapping for what you had done. Sorry.
That was a
Oh,
glad.
okay.
We have a question in the chat from Eben.
Himanshu.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm seeing a hand here as well. So yeah, Maggie, you lead this. I'll just answer.
No, sorry. What kinds of questions are you asking in the interviews you do to establish where the organization is on the 6 categories?
So when I do assessments, I look for a whole bunch of things. I want to understand how the work flows. I want to understand who influences things, decides things, where stuff kind of backs up, where what makes people upset, what causes them to interfere with things, beyond just basic understanding of what their process looks like. But I also look at, okay, so what is everybody complaining about? That helps me understand the far and midway. I talk about, feedback from users. That helps me understand about outcomes. And the other thing I do is I ask a whole bunch of questions of a whole bunch of people, so I get multiple perspectives, including realizing that I get multiple perspectives on the exact same thing, and the perspectives don't actually agree. But because I've asked enough people, I can sort of understand what's really going on there. Okay.
Wow. Himanshu?
Yeah, hi, excellent talk. Very practical information, very easy to, easy to apply, I would say. So, I have a question about how and when you do an evaluation after let's say you got your current assessment and you start implementing some changes. How often do you evaluate, and is it the same process again?
It's the exact same process. What I recommend, well, okay, I do the assessment myself as well, but I actually prefer that the clients do it because they see where things are at. They don't just rely on me, the outsider. So what I recommend is that they do it every, 6, 8, 10 weeks. Now, is it going to change much? Not terribly. It's like stepping on the scale every morning. It's not going to change. Your weight is not going to change a whole lot every day. And the same thing for companies and on a much longer scale. But I want them to keep a finger on the pulse. And when you do your assessment, like every couple of months ish, then you can also catch any bounce backs. I had a client like this actually. They initially they were level 4, and about 3 months later, I asked the VP of engineering to do the assessment himself, and it came out to level 3. And he said, "I know what it is. It's because we have to re-platform, and we just talk, talk, talk. We never go anywhere." And he had the lead architect who had his ideas, and the teams didn't agree, and like things got nowhere. So effectively, their fitness had fallen somewhat. It kind of crossed the boundaries from 4 to 3 because all the tech that they were dealing with the old platform was still there and hurting them, but now the needs were greater. So what happens over time is that the current state changes, of course, especially if we change things intentionally, but then the target of our like the optimum changes as well. That's why it's so super important to kind of keep your eye on the ball.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
Nothing else in the chat. I don't see any hands raised. Any final questions for Gil?
I did have one question for Gil.
Okay.
I did put it on the chat too. So regarding the 4C technical debt reconcile. So should this not be an underlying activity across all levels, especially from your previous example about where technical debt has had piled up so much that
Yes.
it was huge?
Yes.
Shouldn't we be looking at that like at all levels?
So theoretically, yes. Realistically, and again, as an agile coach of over 20 years, it kind of pains me to say this, it doesn't work. So what I've seen is, you'll have, let's say you have a system at level 2. and things are not actually going all that great. And one reason they realize is that they're not going all that great and the system is not stable. What's getting in their way of stabilizing it is that there is some gnarly framework, package, dependency, you name it, and it just makes everything difficult. I had a client like this, but they were doing like single page applications that the architecture was a mess. They could not go from level 2 to 3 because of that. So they forked the team, and the team was like their best developers, and they fixed that problem. Now that is tech debt reduction, but the thing is, that's all they did. Once they fixed this glaring issue, everybody went back to the teams and on to usual backlog things. So it's not like they had a policy or strategy of constantly removing tech debt. Now, some companies try. They do like 10% a week, 20% a week, or whatever, and none of that seems to survive except in rare cases. Because at level 2, for instance, again, the system is not effective or efficient enough. So it's not great in the present. So other than, again, fixing glaring problems, they're not going to worry about the future. They're just not.
Got it. Thank you.
Gil, there was a question about the PDF. The link goes to the book draw. So when you register for the book draw, that's how you'll get the PDF
Yes.
will be a follow-up? Okay.
Yes. The email should go out kind of
Automatically?
automatically, but maybe not immediately.
Okay. Take a check.
Yes. And if somebody wanted to get it and didn't, and you sign up and you didn't get it, just let me know.
Maggie and Gil, I already got the email reply back, so on my email.
Oh, fantastic.
It's already been sent up back. Okay, thank you.
Great. Gil, do you want
Sorry,
me to type?
I didn't understand. You got it?
He got it already, yes.
Okay, nice. Okay.
Great. Gil, which you want to put your contact information again in the in the chat for people before we?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm gonna switch over and do the outro here. While you do that.
Here
we go.
And folks, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Always appreciate that.